I forgive those who strike me, and I commend my soul to God who is merciful. Saint Angelo of Jerusalem, 1185 to 1220, is Carmelite martyr of the Holy Land. Saint Angelo of Jerusalem, also known as Saint Angelus of Sicily or Saint Angelo of Licata, is a medieval Christian martyr and Carmelite friar whose life is preserved through a mixture of historical tradition and devotional hagiography, revered within the Roman Catholic Church, especially among the Carmelites. He is remembered as one of the earliest martyrs of the Carmelite Order and a courageous preacher of the gospel during the turbulent years of the Crusader era. Born in the late 12th century in Jerusalem and dying violently in Sicily in 1220, Saint Angelo became a symbol of unwavering faith, repentance, missionary zeal, and forgiveness. His life reflects the religious struggles of the medieval world, the spread of Carmelite spirituality from the Holy Land into Europe, and the Christian ideal of giving one's life completely for Christ. Though much of his story comes from later devotional traditions rather than contemporary historical documents, his witness continues to inspire Catholics around the world, especially those devoted to the Blessed Virgin Mary and the Carmelite way of life. Although details of his life come primarily from later tradition rather than contemporary documentation, Saint Angelo remains an important figure in Carmelite identity and medieval martyr narratives. Early life in Jerusalem. Saint Angelo was born around 1185 in Jerusalem, then part of the Crusader-controlled Kingdom of Jerusalem. According to tradition, his parents were Jewish, though some later accounts embellish the story with miraculous elements describing their conversion to Christianity through divine intervention. After his mother's conversion, Angelo and his twin brother John were baptized into the Christian faith. This detail, his Jewish origins and conversions, a recurring motif in medieval hagiography, often used to emphasize the triumph of Christianity and the universal reach of salvation. While historical verification is limited, such narratives were common in saints' lives of the period. Angelo's early education is said to have been conducted under the supervision of Christian clergy in Jerusalem, possibly within ecclesiastical institutions connected to the Latin Patriarchate. He is described as intellectually gifted and fluent in several languages, including Greek, Latin, and Hebrew. This multilingual ability reflects the cosmopolitan environment of Crusader Jerusalem, where Latin Christians, Greek Christians, Jews, and Muslims interacted daily. Entry into the Carmelite Order. As a young man, Angelo and his brother reportedly entered the Carmelite Order, a relatively new religious community that originated among hermits living on Mount Carmel in the Holy Land. The Carmelites were inspired by the prophet Elijah and dedicated themselves to a contemplative life of prayer, solitude, and asceticism. According to tradition, Angelo entered the order around the age of 18. He embraced a life of poverty and spiritual discipline, eventually being ordained as a priest. His early religious life is often described in two stages: first as a contemplative hermit on Mount Carmel, and later as an active missionary. Some accounts state that he lived as a hermit for several years, engaging in prayer and ascetic practices in imitation of the Desert Fathers. This period is seen as foundational to his spiritual identity. Mission to Europe. A key turning point in Angelo's life came when he was reportedly instructed by his superior Zor, inspired by divine revelation, to travel to Europe. This journey reflects the broader movement of Carmelite friars from the Holy Land to Western Europe in the early 13th century, especially as Muslim forces under Saladin and his successors gradually reduced Christian presence in the region. Angelo is said to have traveled through the Mediterranean, eventually reaching Italy. Some traditions connect him with a mission to meet Pope Honorius III, seeking papal approval for the Carmelite rule and helping establish the order within the structure of the church. During his travels, Angelo is described as a fervent preacher who converted many people, including Jews and local sinners. These missionary successes are typical of saintly biographies and serve to highlight his holiness and divine favor. Arrival in Sicily. Angelo eventually arrived in Sicily, specifically in the region of Licata. At the time, Sicily was a culturally diverse area with Latin Christians, Greek Christians, Muslims, and Jewish communities living in proximity. However, this diversity also led to tensions and occasional conflict. Licata. Angelo continued his preaching mission, calling for repentance and conversion. His sermons, according to tradition, were powerful and direct, and he gained both followers and enemies. One of his most significant opponents in hagiographic tradition is a nobleman sometimes named Berenger or Berengarius. This figure is portrayed as morally corrupt and hostile to Angelo's preaching. Martyrdom in 1220, the defining moment of Angelo's life came on May 5, 1220, when he was attacked and killed while preaching in Licata. According to tradition, Angelo was publicly denouncing immoral behavior and urging repentance when he was assaulted by armed men sent or led by his enemies. He was stabbed multiple times, possibly inside or near a church often identified as Santi Filippo e Giacomo in Licata. Mortally wounded, Angelo is said to have continued praying, forgiving his attackers, and asking God for mercy upon them. He died shortly afterward, thus becoming a martyr. His death was quickly followed by local veneration. The Christian community in Licata reportedly regarded him as a saint almost immediately, and his burial site became a place of pilgrimage. Cult and veneration after his death, devotion to Saint Angelo spread within the Carmelite Order and beyond. His tomb in Licata became a shrine, and reports of miracles were associated with his intercession. By the 15th century, the Carmelite Order formally recognized his cult. He was eventually beatified by Pope Pius II around 1459, confirming his veneration within the Catholic Church. Over time, his relics were moved and placed in more elaborate reliquaries, reflecting the importance of his cult in Sicilian religious life. His feast day is celebrated on May 5th, the date of his death. Symbolism and iconography. Saint Angelo is typically depicted in Carmelite habit, often with symbols of martyrdom, such as a sword or knife piercing his body, or holding a palm branch representing victory over death. Other artistic symbols associated with him include the Carmelite scapular or habit, a crucifix, a martyr's palm, sometimes floral symbols like lilies or roses representing purity and sanctity. These symbols reinforce his dual identity as both a contemplative monk and a martyr of the faith. Historical context and interpretation. Modern historians approach the life of Saint Angelo with caution. Much of the surviving material comes from later medieval sources rather than contemporary documentation. This makes it difficult to separate historical fact from devotional embellishment. However, the broader historical context is clear. The Carmelites were transitioning from hermits in the Holy Land to a global religious order. The Crusader states were collapsing in the late 12th and early 13th centuries. Sicily was a frontier region of religious and cultural interaction. Preaching missions often met resistance in politically unstable environments within this context. Angelo's story reflects real patterns of missionary activity, religious conflict, and the ideal of martyrdom in medieval Christianity. Legacy. Saint Angelo of Jerusalem remains a symbolic figure within Carmelite spirituality. His life represents fidelity to contemplative religious life, missionary zeal, and evangelization. Martyrdom as the ultimate witness to faith, the transition of the Carmelite Order from the Holy Land to Europe. Although not as widely known as other medieval saints, he holds an important place in Carmelite tradition and in the religious history of Sicily. Conclusion. Saint Angelo of Jerusalem, 1185 to 1220, stands at the intersection of history and legend. Whether viewed as a historical missionary or a hagiographical ideal, his story illustrates the spiritual imagination of the Middle Ages, where faith, conflict, and sacrifice were deeply intertwined. His martyrdom in Sicily and subsequent veneration ensured his lasting place in Catholic memory, particularly within the Carmelite Order, which continues to honor him as one of its early witnesses to faith.